Okay, this is something very brief. This is from Indiscretion of an American Wife. Remember that flick? Jennifer Jones, Montgomery Clip. This is my take on it. It's not really a quatrain. It looks like two couplets, and this is on a sound check. And let me read it for you now. A neo-Neapolitan night girl gone slightly mad, another dysfunctional husband in the garbage can, as she would cater parties, pursuing adulterous clandestine vows. He wants her bones to be the place where raving pit bulls browse. Towards the end of 2009, the Iranian people were in a state of siege. You can remember some of this, as many were overt in their protest against insidious violation of their core freedoms by the police and the military in Iran. During a particularly intense street incident of civil unrest, one of the unarmed protesters, a young girl named Neda, was shot down and killed. A police sharpshooter on a rooftop targeted her and blew her up. Now, in this day and age of camcorders and cell phones and cameras, Neda became the martyred poster girl from the Green Revolution in Iran. Camera lenses focusing on her bleeding and dying all over the internet, and what follows here is a 5-part meditation on the events of that day. I know what you're thinking, 5 parts? We're going to be here all night! There are only 4 lines in each section. Beautiful. Am I painless or what? This is called The Sundown Sky. Just outside cities bordering Iranian land, we stand under the sundown sky, and we experience our own stripped feelings as they flake in the Green Revolution of 2009. The Persian Empire has been handcuffed to insurgent walls as fallen angels of freedom and firebombs contingent with gun thunder, manufacturing explosions like strange oranges. Tinted streaks of martyrs' blood and wide-open fascist militia street murder by rooftop ambush, and no bandages to cover wounds of unarmed civilians who are human money robbed by law. The hollow body string instruments of wisdom whine on the winds of political desolation, and during blazing storms of bloodletting, while the world waits for us to remove its fuchsia raincoat. Neda wants to go home, but too late. The weathers of war warn her about melees of hired assassins whose battering batons crack open what's left of her brothers and sisters in Iran's cold hell dawn. This is something from my most recent book, titled The Demented Chauffeur and Other Mysteries. But for tonight, I'm going to call it The Demented Chauffeur and Other Mysteriosos. A book that you should take home tonight. Mysteriosos. Put that in your personal home library. This is called Bringing the War Back Home. Remembering when the U.S. President George, the senior Bush, got food poisoning in Japan and hurling all over the Nipponese flag, in retrospect, a perfect metaphor, perhaps, for the degenerate perpetration of Operation Desert Storm. The 1980s were going away, and I was catching a green light, walking across the terminal illness of Pico Boulevard. Then over to my neighborhood street, hoofing down the driveway, past the main house to a used-to-be pool shed dressing room attached to the former 1940s bungalow residence where I've been living for the past 19 years. The refugee woman from Central America who escaped being skewered by CIA-sanctioned police in Nicaragua was cacked out in a garden chair in front of her apartment compartment adjacent to mine. She's always been rather decent and friendly, and is now holding up this morning's edition of the Los Angeles Times, pointing at one of the sub-headlines, reporting what the Bushman did on a visit to Japan. "Your president is sick," she said. I answered, "They're the only kinds who get elected." I stepped into my room, took a vintage water pistol off its easel, and thought about my father's brother who came back from World War II, moved to Utica, New York, using a similar toy, held up a liquor store for 2 bottles of Jameson Irish, was immediately apprehended and sentenced to doing a nickel for armed robbery and arson. Yes, that's the way this country treats its brave and damaged veterans of foreign conflict. So thinking about all of it, putting the barrel of the water gun against my right temple, nudging the trigger, and washing out my version of Vincent van Gogh's other ear. 2 poems that impacted my life when I was 19. One was in Seymour Prim's gold medal anthology called The Beats by Philip Lamantia. And the other one was an issue of Evergreen Review where Michael McClure paid tribute to Jackson Pollock. A couple of years later, I was able to write something dedicated to Lamantia, and I called it Dog Show, and then I wrote right away something dedicated to McClure called Pony Show. And I'll read that one to you now. Pony Show, after Michael McClure. Shirt loaded with chevrons, starry blossoms of sweat, on battlegrounds bleak rose. Always the war jazz swing of choppers, dance our words down flesh canyon walls. Autumn berries. I had just finished writing a review for the LA Free Press of Michael McClure's book, September Blackberries, published in 1974. Autumn berries. Spill pills bottled in air. These are the shook trees of peacetime hostilities. We stand starry-eyed in Cambodia, off trajectories. We're hyped like exaggerated footballs. We have the same first name, too. Constantly shaking trees. And a totally happy birthday celebration to you, Michael. Remember when we were doing a reading about 20 years ago, almost to the day, at the Fairfield Community Center. And it really was. It really was. It really was. Amy, do you remember that?
It was Fairfield.
It was pleasant.
I drove. It was Fairfield.
If there's a controversy about that, I remember.
It was Fairfield.
It was Fairfield.
Absolutely.
So I read, and we were walking out into the parking lot, and we separated, and McClure called over to me and said, "Hey, thank you for reading that poem to Charles Olson." And as serendipity would have it, 3 months ago, that poem to Charles Olson was published as a broadside by 48th Street Press in Philadelphia. So I have to read this now. After 20 years down the road. After Charles Olson. Simply the words. We skip the units of breath, and there is no bronchial interference. We fire papier-mâché bullets in order to confound the enemy. Our weapons will be blowing away all psychotic alphabets. Yet still, we become vulnerable as a nightingale on a winter-blown branch or an egret on a wave-battered rock. And I was thinking, you're going to have a great time, great people. I was thinking 20 years, maybe this is 20 years later, 20 years from now, why don't we do a reading? And what we got to think of an occasion. And this is what I'm thinking. We convince Bob Brannaman to convert to Judaism. And McClure and I will read at his bar mitzvah. 20 years from today. And I really want to thank Richard Modiano, Carly Archibek, S.A. Griffin for opening the portals for this perfect evening at Beyond Baroque. And I want to thank all of you for your kind attention, being part of the congregation here, right? At the church of Beyond Baroque. And don't forget the 4 box on your way out the door. I'm going to finish. This is my last blast. And I wrote this at another birthday party. In 1985, the trumpet artist Chet Baker, his birthday party in 1985 in Santa Monica. And just a year and a half later, he copped a heroin nod and went out of the window and died of his injuries on a street in Amsterdam. And everybody, to this day, thinks, this is a funeral. Oh, you wrote a funeral poem. No, I didn't. I wrote it that night in 1985 at his birthday party. So, and this is it. And it's got 13, not stanzas, they're 13 strokes. And so I call it appropriately Baker's Dozen. You cooked at El Camino College, mixing the main ingredients. You joined Jerry Mulligan at The Hague on Wilshire Boulevard, Carson Smith and Chico Hamilton charging the battery. Each solo swung, pendulum audiences, independent body clocks, anniversary nights, each one a glowing candle on a faultless cake. Celebrating another birthday of West Coast modern sounds. Later, corner of Hollywood and Vine, I'm 14, still barred from jazz bars, standing in front of Zardi's open door, bathing in your brass waterfall. Despite legendary status, which makes any California jazz history practically synonymous with your name, we never find you simply West Coasting. Deep, ethereal runs recall Bix. But when you sing ballad visions, we see with the same fragile clarity. When you aren't doing a medium up reading of Just Friends, you may resurrect Gershwin's, but not for me. Each scat chorus as warm, airy, and buoyant as an Angora wiffle ball. You were one of the most in a time when we never had even the slightest idea that music would turn eventually into the least. Come on back, Chet. Do mouth-to-mouthpiece resuscitation. Just try to revive idiomatic warmth of graduation day at the cool school. I remember what Miles Davis said. The most important notes to a jazz musician are the ones he leaves out. Chesney H. Baker, the silences when you lay out between bursts of blowing chorus improvisation become like all those spaces poets leave out between their lines of image life. Thank you so very much.